Friends, I pray that I may speak to you in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Dark, scary. They're alive! The dead are walking! Isn't that Ezekiel? It's a zombie apocalypse. Much crazier than anything we see in Hollywood, right? A valley of dry bones. A whole field full of dead bones. Now that's enough to make me think of the heebie-jeebies. But much more, God says, prophesy to these dry bones. The lesson says, it started rattling. Here they come. A foot bone, a thigh bone, a collarbone. Suddenly there are sinews, there's tissue. Now, imagine this is going to be really gross, right? Imagine putting yourself back together from the inside out. Some of that you don't want to see. Zombies, dead things walking, living, dead but without breath. And then God says, prophesy breath into them that they may live. So we've got some walking dead in the first lesson. We've got some walking dead in our gospel too, right? Not quite as scary, much sweeter, but still really odd. Lazarus has been dead in the tomb long enough he smelled it. His flesh has already begun to rot. And that's when Jesus comes and says, roll away the stone, calls him out, and this dead one is living. It says, unbind him, for he lives. Now, I don't think we actually read this because we believe in zombie apocalypses. Though it's kind of fun to think about. But more today that we have to talk about death. Life and death, and life beyond death. That's what the lessons are pointing us to, and rightly would. For we're this close to Holy Week. We're this close, but 1 week from now, we'll begin that final week with Jesus. His triumphal entry, his meal with his friends, and of course, his own death. When Jesus, the Son of God, will be reduced to nothing more than a corpse. A dead body that will be laid in a tomb just like Lazarus. We're this close. We're on this side of the resurrection. Now we know how it'll end, because in 2 weeks from now we get to breathe a sigh of relief that Christ got out of that tomb. But this moment we're still on this side of death. And of course, our living is this side of resurrection too. For though we trust and hope that God will raise us at the last, we still live in this life where we only know death. We trust in the resurrection, yet what we experience is the pain of dying. So thinking about today's sermon, I got to thinking about what are my memories with death and dying. I tried to think, what's the earliest memory I have? What's yours? Think about it. What's the earliest memory you have of a funeral, of death? Is it a poignant memory or kind of fuzzy? Mine is very poignant. I was a second grader. Now, I'm sure I had a pet die before then, and that was sorrowful, but this was the first time I'd ever seen a dead body. And somehow it was very different. It was my great-uncle Gerald. Now, I didn't know great-uncle Gerald very well. I met him a couple times. I mostly remember him as a rather rotund man sitting in a lazy boy. A t-shirt on, the football game on the TV, and a Budweiser in his hand. I'm sure he probably said some nice thing to me like, oh boy, you're getting big or something, but I don't really remember ever talking to Uncle Gary. But when he died, Mom decided I was old enough that I needed to go to a funeral. That it was now I was of age to pay my respects. Okay. So we went to the funeral home, and I remember walking in and just looking and being in shock Because there was Uncle Harold, not in his lazy boy anymore, but laying flat, and not lounging, but stiff. And instead of just that comfy t-shirt, it was a tight tie up to here. And this is a man who didn't wear ties. And he was so rigid. And I also remember being so perplexed. Why is he wearing rouge? Uncle Harold was wearing rouge. And we got up there, but then what really seared in my memory was Mom said, okay, pay respects, go up and say goodbye. And there I was seeing that face, that shine, that makeup, and I put up my hand and touched his and then flinched back. Because while I don't really remember ever touching Uncle Harold alive, when I touched him now, he was ice. And it wasn't right. Bodies aren't supposed to be ice cold. And I knew somehow something had changed in me. That now on, I knew something about that icy cold of death. How different death makes life. I'm sure you all have a different account, but I'm wondering if you all don't have somehow a similar experience. That ripping that happens in death, that change, that icy cold, that reality that the way things were will never be the same. Of course, it's all the worse when death comes knocking at the door of our most loved ones. When it comes tragically and quickly, or even when it comes peacefully. But to those whom we know, it still manages to just rip us in two, doesn't it? Like Jesus, maybe we came 2 days too late. Or maybe we didn't get there to say all we wanted to say. Or even maybe we did, but somehow it wasn't enough. If only we had more time. More time to share, to savor the moments. And even when it's a death that's in some ways a blessing, it still hurts, doesn't it? It still tears at us and makes us feel this loss that will never be the same as it was before. We live on this side of resurrection. We trust that in death they are at peace. But we know the pain of their past. I think, too, of my second year at Yale. And I had a professor, Emily Towns, this grand name, womanist theologian, talking about the death cries. She said, you know, whenever someone you really love dies, sometimes it's like out of your belly, a cry just comes up. And I thought, well, okay, Emily, but I'm from the Midwest. We don't cry like that. You're a Southern black woman, and you can cry like that, but I don't. And then that year, my grandma died. Grandma, and it was expected. She was old. It was not a hard death. And I got the call, and I was sad, but I didn't really cry much. I had to go home, and I flew home, and I got there, and I was sad, but I still hadn't had this gut-wrenching streak that Emily talked about. Until we got ready for the funeral, and they brought the family in, and we saw her body, and then it struck me that never again would Grandma and I talk. Grandma, who almost my entire childhood, every Friday night, I rode my bicycle over, and we went to dinner, and I stayed over, and we talked for hours. Grandma who loved me more than life itself, I think. Grandma who would have done anything for me. Grandma who knew me so intimately. And that was never going to be remembered. Now, I knew the bond was still there, but we're never going to be able to share like we shared. And then as a good Midwesterner not wanting to cry, I ran out of the room and found the first door I could was a bathroom. And then Emily was right. Somewhere deep down, out of the depths of my soul, I just had to wail and weep. know something about that too. Something about, even though we know the hope of the resurrection, we still feel the pain of living just this side of it. The depths that it calls out of us. The pain, the time it takes. Now, friends, grief is God ordained. For Jesus himself wept. Jesus, who was the resurrection, wept for his friends. So we shouldn't feel bad when we moan and when we long and when we cry, because God gave it to us, because healing will come again. But we have to live on this side, trusting in the hope that Jesus is the resurrection. That's the only thing that keeps us from despair. That though we die, and death surrounds us all over, no one gets out of life alive, no one gets to live without knowing this pain. Even as we live each day, death, our life embraces. We cling to Jesus, who says, no matter what, you will live again. You will live with me. I am the resurrection. I am the life. Even though you die, yet shall you live. So with sighs too deep for words, out of the depths we come. We come broken, and we come trusting in Jesus' love. For what wondrous love is this, that Jesus Christ died for us. What wondrous love that God will turn our sighs to singing. You hear the cries? What wondrous love that God will not be disobeyed. What wondrous love that our moaning